plus most of the countries who are also dependent heavily on crude might also change tack.
Every country in the world will right now thinking of reducing the dependence on imported hydrocarbons and moving greater towards electricity.
So what you're suggesting is Trump might actually end up helping Chinese, and giving huge leg up to the electric vehicle industry.
China is a one-stop source for everything electric. Europe will see China not as a rival, but as a source of stability, as something, a country that will enable Europe to gain independence from imported hydrocarbons. And that will have national security implications.
Yesterday, the rupee dropped by 108 paisa in a single session, worst fall in 4 years. Where do you think it is heading in the medium term? Is the fall temporary and can we expect it to bounce back? Hello and welcome to the Federal, to a special program. The West Asia conflict is raging for over 3 weeks now, and there is no sign of it abating anytime soon. President Donald Trump, in his latest post on Truth Social, has said that, and I quote, "We are getting very close to meeting out our objective as we consider winding down our military efforts in the Middle East with respect to the terrorist regime of Iran," unquote. He further goes on to say that, and the achievements of his military, he describes those achievements and says, the objectives, kind of what he's saying earlier, have been met. Now, of course, none of us know what his objectives were when the Trump started his war against Iran. But he seemed to be outlining some of the achieved goals, saying that Iran's defense capabilities have been destroyed, how he didn't allow it to come anywhere near its nuclear capability, etc. Though earlier he had claimed after 12-day war that all the nuclear establishments in Iran were destroyed. He has further said in his Truth Social post that he has managed to protect Middle East allies and almost named all the Gulf nations. As far as Gulf of Hormuz is concerned, he feels it could be guarded by others if necessary, and adds on to say that actually it may not be necessary because the situation will be fine. Now, we really do not know if the war is really winding down, but what we know is that this war is not sustainable and must come to an end sometime. To discuss this and more, and also see how the world may look like after the war, I'm joined by T K Arun, senior journalist who has been the page editor of the Economic Times for over 2 decades and now an eminent columnist and a writer. And he also writes for TheFederal. TK, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amy.
First up, let's examine the fate of rupee. Once the war comes to a close, what it may look like. Yesterday, the rupee dropped by 108 paisa in a single session, worst fall in 4 years. Where do you think it is heading in the medium term? Is the fall temporary and can we expect it to bounce back like we expect the stock market to?
I think the fall is sort of temporary. While the rupee might not recover the full extent of its loss, a considerable extent will be made up. As we can see, when the war began, there was a flight of capital from the rest of the world towards the US. The US dollar had been depreciating before the war started. And in that moment of panic when the war started, capital once again switched back to the safety of the US government bonds. So this really strengthened the dollar, which in turn meant that most of the currencies depreciated. So did the rupee. But the rupee has been depreciating for quite some time, both the real effective exchange rate and the nominal effective exchange rate. So that is not particularly good for the prospects of inflation in our country, although some might argue that it will help our exports to get a little bit of a boost. But since our imports have become more expensive, particularly in the case of oil, whose prices are going up sharply because of the war in Iran, it's a problem. Though this will have a major inflationary effect going forward. While the first round effect of the increase in the price of oil should not be curtailed by the RBI through monetary policy action, when that price feeds into the economy in general and affects all supply chains and then becomes a part of the generalized rise in prices, then the RBI will have no choice but to increase rates to curb that inflation. So that will have its own dampening effect on economic growth and but at the same time, it will also strengthen the rupee when that happens. And some of the
Yeah.
panic-stricken flows will reverse out of the US to the emerging markets and other economies, and some of the weakening of the rupee will also come down as a result. So I think to a large extent, the fall of the rupee is temporary and would be reversed once the war is over. However, inflationary impacts will continue for quite some time because oil supplies are being curtailed. Our natural gas imports are going to stand curtailed for quite some time, and these will have consequences primarily of inflation and scarcity of these products, and that will have its own telling effect on the rupee and the economy.
Right. See, before the beginning of the war, the rupee was around 91.8 against the dollar, and yesterday it was at 93.71. The analysts expect that it might go down to rupees 95 in next 6 months. Even if war ends, it might take a while for the restoration of normalcy in crude supplies because it's largely because of crude and the disturbance which happened, and the oil and gas fields have to be repaired and supply chains restored and the global shipping reshaped. So it may all take for a while. So where do you think it is headed? Because the expectation is that it will be 95 if the current rate continues. But even before the war, it was on a slide.
Yes, but I don't think it will go to 95 and beyond. I think it will strengthen once the war ends. Because as I said, once the panic subsides, some of the capital outflows would be reversed and capital would start coming in. And that should be good news for the rupee. But let's accept that as compared to the 2023 base year, the nominal effective exchange rate and the real effective exchange rate of the rupee against six major currencies has depreciated significantly. So there is scope for the RBI to intervene in the currency markets and strengthen the rupee a little bit. After all, we don't have much of a trade deficit or a current account deficit, and there is scope for the rupee to be a little stronger.
So, which means most of the businesses would be making their calculation, imagining or adjusting the rupee to be around somewhere in the level between, the pre-war 91.7 and
Yes,
whatever it is post. So that's the band in
I
which
think
they
so.
were working. Okay.
I think so.
Fine. Yeah, fine. Well, return to the next question related to this. That the whole one biggest truth which has come out is, which we all knew, the high dependence on import of crude. 85% of our oil is imported, and there was an effort made somewhere in the 1980s to indigenize some of this, and the crude levels indigenous went up to about 30%. But that is when the Bombay High was discovered, but which was for a very brief period. We have slipped back to dependence on crude imports. So, what is this now? We're going to, I mean, what would you think the government would have learned from this, and what is that it might happen, or what it could do post war?
So both kind of actions are required. One, to reduce dependence on crude as a source of energy and feedstock. Second, to increase the share of crude that can be, mined, explored and mined from India itself. Now, if you look at the geography from the Middle East, which is awash in oil, if you look at all the way down to Indonesia, where again there is oil and gas, Bangladesh has gas, it is rather surprising that India alone doesn't have much oil and gas. So this is more likely a failure to fully explore and identify the sources of oil and gas in our subcontinent than the actual absolute dearth of oil and gas. After all, when Kane discovered oil in Rajasthan, most other people had abandoned hope of finding anything in the Mangla field. So it is possible that we can, with more vigorous and more scientific exploration and prospecting of oil, we might be able to find more of these hydrocarbons within us. But the most sensible thing to do is actually reduce dependence on crude oil as a source of energy. Increasingly, countries are turning to electricity as a primary form of energy. Europe is well on its way. China has reduced actually imports of oil because They are moving to electricity for their transport, with large scale switch to electric mobility for not only for rail but also for cars. And this is something that is being done by Europe, by particularly some Nordic countries, and this is something that will accelerate. This tendency will accelerate once the war is over and crude prices continue to stay high. So this tendency will take hold in India also, or rather it should. Whether our policymakers have the sense to shift to electricity is open to question, but that's what we should do.
Yeah, but it's very interesting what you're saying, that we didn't explore hydrocarbons enough. An attempt was made, probably given up. And also, it's a very expensive business and time taking. And many attempts were made, but probably that didn't succeed. So, the better option is not to go take that route and go for renewable energy and go for more electric. I mean, it's a kind of a solution which probably India gets automatically, even if it is forced one, as rest of the world would be going taking that direction to avoid fossil fuel or in cause of environment.
No, renewable energy, of course, we should try to generate as much as possible, but that is not really an alternative to crude or any other form of fossil fuel based energy. Right now, we have 50% of our generation capacity non fossil fuel based. Uh, this is from solar, wind, nuclear, hydel. All these non fossil sources constitute more than 50% of our generation capacity. But when it comes to actual generation of power, about close to 70% is still from thermal sources, essentially coal. We have some 20,000 megawatt of gas-based thermal generation capacity, but it is lying idle because the price of gas is so high that we cannot actually find people to buy the electricity generated from gas. So that capacity is lying idle, and the bulk of our generation comes from coal-based thermal plants. So, and there is no short-term escape from having to rely on coal for meeting India's growing energy needs. Let's understand one thing. We are at about one third the global average when it comes to electricity consumption.
Correct.
Per capita energy consumption is one third the global average. We are one fifth China's level of consumption. If we want to become developed, produce more, move around more, and have a higher standard of living, we inevitably consume more power. Especially with global warming, our air conditioning requirements are going to go up substantially. And you'll find that people will are constrained to consume more power just to stay, live through the heat that is going to engulf us in the coming months and the coming years. So we have to rely on thermal power. Now the question is, where do we get this thermal power from? While we are investing in nuclear power, etc., which is a good thing, and that tendency should accelerate, we have to make use of India's core. We have the world's fourth or fifth largest reserves of coal, and we have proven estimated reserves of 220 billion tons of coal. But our policies and our governance are so poor, we are hardly able to mine 1 billion tons of coal. And that only recently we managed to achieve this figure. And still, we are forced to import around 20% of our requirements from abroad, spending precious foreign exchange. So we have to focus on mining coal more efficiently and utilizing that coal to generate the power that we need. And here, one particular way of tapping this coal without producing as much pollution as normally would happen when you burn coal is to gasify the coal. We have a coal gasification mission, but it's still in its initial stages and we haven't gone much far with this. So we need to gasify coal massively. And gasified coal is also a source as a feedstock for producing fertilizer, for producing the entire chain of plastics and other hydrocarbons that we today rely on crude to crack and generate from. So there is much scope to do serious R&D as well as invest in developing our coal gasification capability and utilize domestic coal to generate the primary supply of uh, e- our energy for transport as well as other purpose.
Okay, but then if we want to move more towards electric, there is a dependency there too. And then here again we may have to, if we are saved ourselves from Gulf countries, less dependence on energy in the form of crude oil, but then a dependence on, may say, China would increase for making or building more factories for electric vehicles.
Yeah, so that's a very valid question. Right now, we are dependent on China, not so much for electric vehicles as for storage. Now, when we incorporate a large amount of renewable power in our power grid, that grid has a tendency to become unstable because if the sun suddenly drops, then the solar generation will come down. If the wind speed goes down, wind generation will come down. And this will affect the kind of power going in from these sources into the grid. And if the grid, frequency collapses, then the entire grid will go down. In order to maintain the grid uh, frequency at the required level, which is I think some 49.5 hertz to 50.2 hertz, we need a battery storage power to kick in automatically, and this is governed by electronics, power electronics. Now, both for the battery storage as well as for the power electronics, we are today dependent upon China, which is a major national security vulnerability because we don't know what goes into these electronics that the Chinese supply. And that could very well be a means of sabotaging India's power grid, India's economy, India's defense. So these are things that we need to attend to if we want to switch massively to electricity. It can't
Maybe
be, yeah, it can't be moving more as we are going forward right now. We need to think differently.
right. So we are between devil and deep sea. Maybe one option is, besides renewable, also lay more emphasis on nuclear energy.
Yes, it is.
So that's another
So
option.
yeah, now we have thorium. We have this sands in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc., which is full of monazite, from which you can extract thorium. So the India's original nuclear program was supposed to be a three stage program, and we were supposed to the third stage is generating power from thorium. We have a fast breeder reactor prototype. It is working. They are now only moved to a pilot stage. I don't know why the government is going slow in this program. This should be the utmost priority to indigenously develop fast breeder thorium based generation to move along at top speed and that become a successful source of generation. Right now, you will see all kinds of lobbying, happening to bring in new kinds of nuclear generators from abroad, salt-based, molten salt-based, etc. Now, I think that is kind of lobbying that will harm India's technological capability, and we should be investing more in our science and in our scientists and our existing facilities to help let them develop this capability better and become self-reliant in terms of nuclear technology.
So, which means in the medium term, India face quite a bit of challenges, even if the war gets over, because the energy crisis really seemed to have hit hard. So, it's
Yeah.
a kind of a oil crisis of a different type, which hit the world in 1970s. But what do you think it would have a kind of impact on the globe, on the world itself? Because once the war gets over, and the world, like us, most of the countries who are also dependent heavily on crude, might also change tack. So,
Yes.
who are the countries who will benefit here?
Yeah. So every country in the world will right now thinking of reducing the dependence on imported hydrocarbons and moving greater towards electricity. So, and the electricity can be generated from renewable as well as coal or nuclear or other sources. Germany is now going back to nuclear. Japan has restarted their nuclear plants after Fukushima's fear of the Fukushima repetition has shut down nuclear power plants in their country. And nuclear energy will become a major source. And
France
I
already has.
personally am very hopeful that nuclear fusion will become a reality sooner rather than later. There's been a standing joke that nuclear fusion is the energy of the future and will always remain the energy of the future. But I think that is changing. Now people are actually saying that with the advent of AI, we'll be able to use AI to sort of regulate the fluctuation of the hot plasma in which fusion takes place. Plasma cannot be put in any kind of ceramic or any container. It can only be kept in place using magnetic forces. So that how to calibrate the magnetic force is the main issue and holding the plasma in place. And
Right.
that I think AI is helping. Also, we might actually be moving closer towards nuclear fusion, and that would be, of course, wonderful. And
So which
and
means
even without nuclear fusion, even without nuclear fusion, we should be able to harness fission reactors to better produce more energy successfully.
right. So it appears to me that in the medium term, while the world tries to adjust to these realities, which has actually struck them, must have struck them very hard last 3 weeks. The country which seemed to be really benefiting from all of this, if more and more people or the world have to go electric, it seems to be China, isn't it? Which you told me China
Absolutely,
earlier was
you're
going.
absolutely right. Yeah, China is a one-stop source for everything electric. You have the most advanced battery storage systems. So BESS, battery electric storage systems, is used on a large scale wherever there is considerable amount of renewable power. So Europe right now has one of the most advanced power grids in the world. It connects very many countries and it has multiple renewable sources, the wind power and wave power from the North Sea to solar power wherever possible, particularly in Spain, as well as conventional coal-based and nuclear power. 80% of the power generation in France is from nuclear energy. So all these are integrated into integrated grid, and there they use battery electric storage systems from China. Plus, they use advanced power electronics also from China. So therefore, after this war is over and countries think seriously about going electric, Europe will see China not as a rival, but as a source of stability, as something, a country that will enable Europe to gain independence from imported hydrocarbons. And that will have national security implications. As it is, Trump has sort of forced the Europeans to develop their own defense national security posture.
Yeah.
Trump has virtually said that the allies are covered, and so NATO's future is very, very suspect. And Europe will try to develop its own security capability. And they cannot afford to isolate China the way America would like it. So America sees China as a global pacing rival. Uh, but I think Europe will not see it like that. And that will be, and this war and the desire to go electric that it has narrated is one contributory factor in helping China appear as
So
a
yeah.
source of stability.
So what you're suggesting is Trump might actually end up helping Chinese, uh, and giving huge leg up to the electric vehicle industry or
Yes,
anything electric, which he has seemed to have done unwittingly. And the other
yes, absolutely.
unintended benefit, yeah. So you want to say further? Yeah.
No, no, absolutely. You're right.
Yeah, okay. So then the other factor, what happens to Trump's own promise that his country would make lots of money, lots and lots of money by pumping out more crude? The utterances which his vote base mega out certainly would have loved. What happens to those promises?
So in the short term, of course, higher oil prices are good for American oil companies, and there will be greater demand for American oil and as well as American LNG because of the disruption in the traditional supply sources in the Gulf. However, the American LNG capacity is fairly limited. They don't have enough capacity. I mean, you have to liquefy the gas. It's not a very easy thing to do. And to set up a plant and build it, it will take months, if not years. And right now they are not in a position to make up for the deficit created by the destruction of the Qatar LNG terminal, and it will be a major problem for South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, apart from for India, to find alternate sources of LNG from alternative to the LNG from Qatar. I think Russia will be a major gainer uh, coming in the months to come, because Russia is a source of gas. To China, it can pipe it, and it can set up LNG terminals to ship it around the world to meet the growing demand for gas.
Right.
And see, the LPG is not such a big problem. LPG can be created from crude, and for crude there are many sources. It's not just the Gulf countries, but for natural gas there are not many sources, and there are no easy ways to transporting it apart from through pipeline or by LNG. And uh, here the damage done to the Qatar's gas facilities will have telling effect that will last very long, for
Hmm.
probably a year.
Okay. So, if I have to quickly sum up on this portion of the discussion, so there are two things which are clearly, interesting aspects. May not be that important, but still very interesting. That Trump seemed to have unwittingly helped the cause of climate change, which he thought is a hoax, because if renewable energy and other alternate energy forms are given a bigger importance, then that helps. And he would have also helped the cause of electric vehicles and other things, and therefore China. So the two things which he perhaps hated would be beneficiary of this war.
Plus, he has damaged the dollar.
Yeah,
The
third
when
is
Trump
damage.
was elected,
Yeah,
the dollar index was something like 109. Then during his course he managed to bring it down to one well below 100. I don't know exactly where it stands today, but he has been very bad for the dollar. His tariff tantrums, his policy instability, and the damage it is doing to the world economy,
yeah,
and the lack of trust this generates in people in the US economy and the US dollar. All this has helped to erode the role of the dollar as the anchor currency of the world finance.
right.
That is another Trump contribution to the rise of other countries, his rivals.
So let's quickly go to the other aspect before we close. That we cannot expect the world to remain the same post-war. The geopolitical equations would certainly be altered dramatically, and you have indicated some of this in your article in Basis Point. Uh, what do you think would be the new shape? Say what might happen in immediate Israel's neighborhood. What might happen to Palestinians, the Gulf countries?
So two things will happen. One is that Iran will be resolved to develop nuclear weapons sooner or later. See, uh, North Korea is a rogue nation, completely unlike Iran. But that country can throw whatever tantrum it wants. It can just keep on firing missiles and weapons, testing nuclear weapons into the Sea of Japan, and nothing happens to it. So the lesson clearly is that if you have nuclear weapons and the means of delivering those weapons, you will not be attacked. So Iran will develop a nuclear bomb. And since the trust in the American nuclear umbrella has eroded considerably, many more countries which used to rely on American guarantee of security will now think of developing their own nuclear weapons. I can think of Japan, South Korea, Germany, etc., all developing
Turkey.
nuclear weapons of their own, and Turkey. Turkey, why should, if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, can Turkey be far behind? Pakistan already has a nuclear weapon. China, I mean, see, the current leadership of Turkey sees itself the current heir to the Ottoman Empire. To see that country being without a nuclear weapon while when knows like Pakistan and nuclear weapons is quite a irritating thing for Erdogan. So
So
they
nuclear
will also try to,
proliferation will increase. That's what you're saying.
yes,
Nuclear proliferation will increase, but then
definitely.
it's only
They,
would work as a deterrent. They may still have to spend a lot of money on conventional, weapons.
yes, of
That will
course,
continue.
yes. You will have to spend more on arms. So this is a good time for arms manufacturers and a bad time for welfare and popular empowerment in terms of health and education across the world, particularly in developing countries. The other impact is in terms of the power balance in the Middle East, with Iran being sort of defanged for the at least foreseeable future, next 5-10 years. Israel becomes the preeminent power in that region without a rival to match anything of its capability, without American support. This will naturally embolden Israel to increase the settlements on West Bank, and Gaza is already in such a bad shape that in order to do any reconstruction, people will have to move out. And I will not be surprised if they move to clear the entire current Palestinian areas of its native population and expand the territory of Israel to restore the biblical Canaan, the original land of the Israelites, which they believe was promised to them by God. And this is about to happen.
As far as GCC countries are concerned, maybe less dependence on US. The reliability
Their
of
dependence, they no longer trust the US. No country will trust the US. That's not the only problem. Now, this kind of a disruption of Dubai in terms of their role as a hub for international aviation, as well as a global financial center, it is doing quite serious damage to the GCC countries' ambitions.
right.
The air travel bit might come back, but can people really believe that this is a place to locate their wealth? Will it any longer rival Singapore or Monaco? I have a doubt. So I think the war has done serious damage to the ambitions of these GCC countries to move away from reliance on oil and gas to other forms of stable wealth and income generation. And for that, they have only the United States to thank. And I think that damage will be long lasting and cannot be rectified in a short time.
And finally, the world moving towards multipolarity in a very unregulated manner.
And here, a country like India,
Yeah,
which
and
doesn't
what
want
would
to
be the role
be
of India? Yeah, exactly.
any country, yeah, devolved to any other power, and we have to invest in our own R&D capability. In R&D, India
Right.
currently spends 0.65% of GDP on R&D. Can you imagine? A country which among developing countries were the first ones to set up a space program, nuclear research program, set up IITs. That country is now spending the same proportion of GDP on R&D as Gambia or some other African country. Even the UAE spends more than double our GDP share when it comes to spending on R&D. Our Indian industry is completely vapid. They are captains of industry, start the global stage as major characters, but when the actual ambition is so low, not one of them spends even 1% of GDP on R&D. Only some pharma companies and some public sector units spend any money on R&D. In 2023, for which we have figures available, Amazon, one single company, spent $60 billion on R&D. All of India, private sector, government combined, spent $37 billion on R&D. This is the actual state of our R&D efforts right now. This will have to change dramatically if you are to become capable of depending on strategic autonomy.
Right.
Right under our nose, genius Indian talent is working at global capability centers. Why? Why can't these people be working for developing Indian R&D at Indian capability centers, creating the strategic muscle that India badly needs? Why should we depend upon Israel for avionics or the missile guidance systems? Absolutely useless. All the drones that India used in the Operation Sindhu, they are drone control units which are imported from China. They claim they are Indian drones. Okay, they are Indian drones. They were put together by Indian companies, but the drone control units were imported from China. Why? we have to invest massively in electronics. And without that, without the investments in the entire ecosystem around defense, India cannot defend its strategic autonomy. It's
Right.
not enough to talk big. We have
Right. So,
to act.
the Atmanirvata or the self-dependence from being a mere slogan, it need to actually work on the ground if we are
Yes.
to, really to fulfill our dreams to become a kind of, a developed nation with such a large population.
Here, I would like to say just one more thing. This is not just the center's obligation. Every state government is now frittering away its fiscal resources on transfer payments to their voters in the
Yeah.
hope that they will be able to retain their power. Now, don't states have any responsibility in developing R&D? Don't they have the capacity to? Certainly, many states, particularly in South India, have the potential to harness their peoples in whom they have invested in the past and develop new R&D capability. I think even the states must look at their policies and introspect and do more.
Thank you so much, TK, for your insightful comments. It was very interesting to talk to you. Let's hope this terrible war comes to an end soon. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.